fresh meat.
Oh, welcome to the best horror movie you never saw, where we shine a light on horror movies that you may have missed, haven't seen in a long time, or just plain forgot about. On this episode, we're going back to 1998. It was that year an audience was asked, what is more frightening? Stephen King, a fugitive Nazi war criminal, director Bryan Singer? It's okay if you chose all of the above, because 1998's APT Pupil is a dish cooked with all of those ingredients.
It's good.
The film is based on the 1982 novella of the same name by Stephen King, which features a fugitive Nazi war criminal played by Ian McKellen. It comes from Bryan Singer, a director we had no clue was nearly as problematic as he would turn out to be, allegedly. All of that aside, this psychological thriller, also starring the late Brad Renfro, David Schwimmer, and Bruce Davison, is an underrated affair that features strong performances, particularly from Ian McKellen, who disappears into the role of the chilling Kurt Dissender. Despite mixed reviews and soft box office, this Stephen King adaptation is a film that deserves more eyes on it. However, as we dive into the project's history, we may discover that the man at the helm has made this movie a sort of rotten stepchild because his sordid personal life has left more than a few blemishes on the film. As always, we've got you covered on this wild and crazy ride as we jump head first into one of the best horror movies you never saw. I want to thank you guys for watching the best horror movie you never saw and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like the video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. As you were growing up, I'm sure there was always that creepy old man living in your neighborhood that just didn't seem quite right. He becomes a thing of legend as people speculate about his history, which can make someone who is very curious want to discover more. High school student Todd Bowden lives next door to his elderly neighbor Arthur Denker, who he discovers is really Kurt Dissender, a former Sturmbannführer in the SS who is now a fugitive war criminal hiding from justice. What does someone like Todd choose to do with this information? He naturally decides to blackmail the old man by threatening to turn him into the police. You know, what we would all do if we discovered our next-door neighbor was a Nazi war criminal. Because we all know how well that would turn out. We learn that Todd may have some kind of darkness in his heart because he is fascinated with the Nazi atrocities perpetrated during World War II, and his blackmail deals with him forcing Dissender to share disturbing stories of what it was like working at Nazi extermination camps and how it felt to participate in genocide. Todd isn't satisfied with merely hearing stories. He's in this for 100% realism. On one occasion, Todd purchases an SS uniform from a costume shop and forces his new teacher to wear it, thus beginning a relationship that stirs a sense of malice in each of them. The more time that Todd spends with his new, unlikely companion, his grades begin to suffer. He loses interest in his girlfriend, and he hides his bad grades from his parents. Before we know it, the roles are being reversed. The criminal begins to blackmail Todd into studying to restore his grades, and he threatens to expose his dalliance with Nazism to his parents. Their relationship becomes so entwined at one point that the old man even poses as Todd's grandfather and goes to an appointment with his school counselor, Edward French, played by David Schwimmer. The discussion of war crimes affects both of them, and the mentor even begins to take great pride in his students' incredible turnaround, going from near high school dropout to straight A's in a matter of weeks. If only he knew. The duo's relationship intersects with violence when Dissender tries to kill a homeless person who had earlier seen him in his SS uniform. After suffering a heart attack, he calls Todd, who then finishes the job, cleaning up the crime scene and calling an ambulance for his new friend. While at the hospital, he's recognized again by a death camp survivor sharing his room and is arrested. Talk about some bad luck. Juxtaposed to this, Todd is graduating from high school as his school's valedictorian. Wait, he got valedictorian for a few weeks of hard work? How dumb is the rest of his school? Todd is eventually questioned about his relationship with Dissender, but he manages to convince the police that he didn't know his true identity. Once his school counselor, Edward French, realizes that the man he met was not Todd's grandfather, but a war criminal, he confronts him, which results in a new cycle of blackmail that shows the pupil is certainly now the teacher. Bringing a complex film like APT Pupil to the big screen is no easy task. When Stephen King's novella was published as part of his collection Different Seasons in 1982, producer Richard Kobritz optioned feature film rights to the novella. At the time, Kobritz met with actor James Mason to play the source's material's war criminal Kurt Dissender, but Mason died in July 1984 of a heart attack before production could begin. The producer then approached Richard Burton for the role, but Burton also died in August that same year. Talk about cursed. By 1987, production on the film began with Nickel Williamson cast as the aging Nazi and 17-year-old Rick Schroeder stepping in to play Todd. Director Alan Bridges began helming the project with the script co-written by Ken Wheat and his brother Jim, in a clear sign that the universe was trying to say that this project was bad luck after 10 weeks of filming. The production suffered a lack of funds from its production company, Granite Releasing. This resulted in the film being placed on hold. Kobritz sought to revive the production, but when the opportunity came a year later, Schroeder had aged a bit too much to be believable as a 17-year-old boy, and 40 minutes of usable footage was ultimately abandoned. The film came back to life thanks to an up-and-coming filmmaker named Bryan Singer. The director first read the novella when he was 19 years old, and when he got into the business, he wanted to adapt it into a feature film. In 1995, Singer approached his friend and screenwriter Brandon Boyce to write a spec script adapting the story. When the original option to the novella expired in 1995, Stephen King sued to get the rights back, but this intersected with Singer and Boyce, providing the iconic novelist with the first draft of their script and a copy of Singer's soon-to-be revolutionary film, The Usual Suspects, which had yet to be publicly released. King was so impressed with Singer that he optioned the rights to the director for a mere $1, arranging to be compensated when the film was eventually released. Singer made some changes to King's source material, but he was reportedly okay with the changes, saying they still fit with the tone of the story. Singer was almost obsessively attracted to APT Pupil, a piece that he described as a study in cruelty. The director prepared for the film by reading material like the 1996's Hitler's Willing Executioners, which confirmed his beliefs that Nazi war criminals felt guiltless and matter-of-fact about what they did. Singer was particularly intrigued by how Todd Bowden's interactions with Kurt Dissender start to affect him mentally. He had said, and I quote, "I like the idea of the infectious nature of evil. The notion that anybody has the capacity within them to be cruel if motivated properly is, I think, a scary concept." You know, knowing what we know about Bryan Singer, it's easy to see why he felt so connected to the more unpleasant themes of the film's story. Showing just how dedicated Singer was to getting the movie made, he turned down opportunities to direct films like The Truman Show and The Devil's Own after the success of The Usual Suspects, which earned him an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. He feverishly pursued APT Pupil because, as he puts it, it was very dark subject matter and it was something that came from passion. Perhaps because of his success with The Usual Suspects, Singer was financially supported by producer Scott Rudin and the production company Spelling Films. $1 million was paid towards pre-production when Ian McKellen was cast as Dissender and Brad Renfro was cast as Todd Bowden. With the production set to begin in June 1996, the film hit a familiar snag that plagued the first attempt to get this movie made by Richard Kobritz. Due to financial disagreements between Singer and Rudin, the start date was pushed back and subsequently canceled. Producer Don Murphy and his partner Jane Hampshire worked on getting refinancing. Coming to the rescue was Mike Medavoy, a former chairman of TriStar Pictures. He stepped in with financial backing from his production company Phoenix Pictures to the tune of $14 million. This got things back on track with filming set to take place on location in Altadena, California. When it came to the lead roles, Ian McKellen was attracted to the part of Dissender because he was impressed by Singer's work with The Usual Suspects. He also saw the role as a nice, meaty part. The character's language was originally written for a very stoic German, according to Singer, but the director felt that McKellen's complex personality could contribute to the character. In Singer's words about choosing McKellen for the role, he stated, "I felt if I could combine his complexity, his colorfulness to the stoic German character, it would create a character that, although evil, would garner more sympathy and would be more enjoyable for the audience to watch." In the case of Brad Renfro, the young actor dazzled audiences and critics alike in his film debut at age 11 in 1994's The Client. Renfro had no acting background before being cast in The Client and was living with his grandmother in a trailer park at the time. Renfro was all raw talent and was gifted with natural screen presence in front of the camera. Singer auditioned a couple hundred young men for the role of Todd Bowden and ultimately chose 14-year-old Renfro. When speaking of casting the young actor, Bryan stated, "Brad was the brightest, the most intense, and the most real. Not only could he have the intensity when we wanted, there was a hollowness that he could convey, and by the end of the picture, he had to become this empty vessel." While the young actor was making the film, people around him were worried about his state of mind because of portraying such a manipulative character like Todd Bowden. At the time, Renfro said of his performance, "It's a trip I have to take. People just kind of have to leave me alone when I'm doing it. It's my job." Renfro would begin having difficulties with his personal life during this period of the late 90s, which included a series of arrests and stints in rehab. That raw talent I spoke of earlier was also a source of a lot of pain for the young performer. It's these two roles and performances that provide APT Pupil with its intriguing complexities. The interplay between Todd and Dissenter is fascinating to watch, and while the subject matter is particularly dark, the psychology of their union becomes almost obsessive focus for the audience. When you're watching two great tennis players going head-to-head in a match, you can't take your eyes off it. That's exactly what you see here between McKellen and Renfro. They're both serving up great turns here as the veteran performer and the kid with natural talent, and they become dynamite scene partners. Part of the reason Singer wanted to adapt this particular work was because he wanted to make a Stephen King horror film that was less supernatural and was motivated by more character-driven terror. The real horror on display is a psychological warfare between Todd and Dissenter that turns into a warped teacher-student relationship. John Ottman served as both film editor and music composer, and he uses both of these techniques to help drive the intensity of their increasingly codependent union. In the beginning, when Todd is laying down the rules of his blackmail, you hear a certain repetitive thematic idea within the score. You hear the same music when Dissenter begins to turn the tables on Todd, which draws you back to the initial blackmail and melodically allows you to hear that the tables are turning back and forth. It's these subtle choices that make the audience succumb to the complex nature of their relationship. APT Pupil premiered at the Venice Film Festival in September 1998 and was commercially released on October 23rd in 1,448 theaters. Perhaps because it was released so close to Halloween and in the wake of teen slasher craze dominating the box office, APT Pupil was a tricky film to market. The movie was originally slated to be released in February, but the film's distributor moved the date to October as they felt it belonged alongside more serious-minded films. They also likely thought it would be easier to try to market the film to the late October crowd that would be more inclined to catch a suspense thriller to get their Halloween thrills. TriStar and Phoenix Pictures released Urban Legend, a slasher film riding the success of Scream just a month before APT Pupil, and it was no doubt an easier sell to the movie-going public. Singer's film is purely cerebral. There aren't a lot of visceral thrills. It seems like TriStar and Phoenix Pictures chose the late October release date and simply hoped for the best. Likely due to an uneven marketing campaign, APT Pupil opened to a dismal $3.6 million and placed 9th on the box office chart. It was a quick death from there, with the film earning a mere $8.9 million on a budget of $14 million, thus making the film a commercial disappointment.
Le who? The her.
Critics were decidedly mixed on APT Pupil, especially when compared to the great critical reception that Singer's previous film, The Usual Suspects, received. The film holds a rotten score on 53% on Rotten Tomatoes, with a consensus that reads, a somewhat disturbing movie that works as a suspense thriller yet isn't completely satisfying. Roger Ebert, in his 2-star review, praised the performances, especially by Ian McKellen, but ultimately felt that the film reveals itself unworthy of its subject matter. He also thought the material was offensive and lacked a social message or an overarching purpose. Janet Maslin of the New York Times said in her review that both actors play their roles so trickily that tensions escalate until the horror grows unimaginatively gothic. Singer's interpretation of apt pupil in hindsight feels motivated by his own influences. Writer of the films of Stephen King, Dennis Mahoney, says that sadomasochism, homoeroticism, and homophobia are particularly highlighted in Singer's retelling of Stephen King's novella. Caroline Pickard and David Frank wrote in Frames of Evil the Holocaust as horror in American film, that the Nazi monstrosity in the film is structured through sexual abnormality where a series of binary dichotomies are introduced. One of them is described as victimizer versus victim. This reflects the film's hidden tensions in which Todd and Dissender's roles of powers are reversible. Perhaps a more pointed moment is broken down when Todd gives the old man an SS uniform to wear and is told to march under his orders. They felt that Singer heightened the students' demands by making them dominant and more voyeuristic. The film's ending involving Todd's blackmail of his school counselor Edward French particularly hits differently, given Singer's alleged history. The main players in the film came out of the project's subpar performance unscathed, at least professionally. Singer went on to make hit films and even teamed with Ian McKellen again on the X-Men franchise, which the latter portrayed the iconic villain Magneto. Singer skated through Hollywood with mostly murmurs about his alleged erratic and questionable behavior, but all that came to a head when he was let go from his directing duties on Bohemian Rhapsody. In addition to X-Men and other solid films, McKellen also donned one of the greatest wizardry beards as Gandalf the Grey in Lord of the Rings. The first installment, The Fellowship of the Ring, even garnered him as Best Supporting Oscar nomination. As for Brad Renfro, he made more movies after Apt Pupil, including Bully and Ghost World, but he just couldn't fight the demons that engulfed his personal life. Sadly, due to acute heroin and morphine intoxication, the actor died at the young age of 25. All of this aside, Apt Pupil is still a fascinating character study that is boasted by superb performances from its leads. The film certainly isn't for everyone and requires a degree of patience, but it's a cerebral experience that has remained far too underrated in the years since its release. The filmmaker might be problematic, but the finished product should be judged on its own merits as a chilling dive into a duo of unsavory minds.